This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from the BBC. Am I sounding quite healthy? Do you think we'll get to the end of this?
I'm not sure if you'll be alive by the time that people get to listen to this.
Okay, that also might be true. This is where the sinful members of the Radio 2 audience all come forward, and we know that there are hundreds of thousands of you. Joe and Sister Bobby here, slightly shorter podcast as usual because there are only 3 confessions on the show this week because I was at Buckingham Palace.
Were you?
Oh, Sir Simon, it's so good of you to have us on your podcast.
Well, you know, it's clearly not that. Although I did feel as though I got a knowing look.
This week's more compact confession collection includes George's simple story, His Stuns the Bride, Wendy's tale, Car Washed Up, plus a classic confession from the crypt that's been requested by you.
But we'll start this week's podcast with Nicci's confession, I got dye on your arms tonight.
Please be seated.
Simon and the Collective, what follows is a tale of deceit, danger and degenerate behaviour. Going back some 36 years. It's been on my conscience since, not much, and I appeal to your better nature to enable me to close the door on my disgrace. It's the summer of 1979. My twin sister and I had just finished our first year of A-levels, and so we're at a delightful loose end, lounging about, practising our makeup skills, visiting places of local culture, pubs, discotheques, that kind of thing. Remember discotheques, Bobby?
I do, actually, yeah.
There you go. As most youngsters will do, given half the chance. It's that loose end that you're at the end of A-levels. What a wonderful time that is. That summer, having just completed an extensive and costly refurbishment of the kitchen, our parents were about to set off on a well-deserved 2-week holiday, leaving us at home to feed the cat, pay the window cleaner, and continue our busy lifestyle. On departure, Dad called us into the kitchen and said, "Now, here's £100, girls. This will be in 1979.
Yeah, 1979, blimey.
This will be enough to buy your food for the fortnight and give you a couple of nice nights out with your friends. But please, don't spend it all on booze."
That's loads.
That's a lot of money,
That's
do
a
you
lot of
think?
money.
Anyway. Well, we heeded our dad's advice. We didn't spend all of his cash on booze, just most of it, leaving just enough to buy a cheap bottle of hair dye. Because obviously that's what you do with the loose change. You see, the year was 1979, punk was still shocking the world, and our own favourite, David Bowie, was in the charts at the time, so colouring one's hair was pretty much essential. We both had hairstyles of the moment, short at the sides, longer and savagely back-combed on the top. My sister was planning on a blonde quiff, like Alana from the Thompson Twins. Yeah, you got that?
Oh, yeah, good look.
Very nice. And I was going for a more subtle white stripe down the left side of my head, like a skunk or a badger. What a nice image.
Not so much.
Now, neither of us had dyed our hair before, but how hard could it be, we thought. We bundled into our kitchen, plastic gloves on, tail combs at the ready. Skimming through the instructions on the box before we got started, I spotted a warning with words to the effect that once opened and mixed, the bleach should be used immediately. But there was no explanation as to why. I opened it, poured some out and had a sniff. Nothing awful happened, so I put the lid back on and then sent my sister upstairs to fetch towels as we planned to do our restyle in the kitchen where there would be more room. My sister was faffing around upstairs with the towels, so after rereading the instructions on the bleach and briefly noting once again the mysterious instruction to use the product immediately after opening the bottle, I decided that I would quickly do my hair on my own before she came back, just to be sure that there would be at least enough for me to have my stripe as planned, and she'd have to eke out what was left for her quiff. So I opened the bottle. Simon, if you now take a moment to purse your lips and fill your cheeks until they are taut with air, and then expel the air violently while saying the word poom in a soft but aggressively determined manner. Poom. Was that aggressive enough?
No.
Poom. You will achieve a noise similar to that of the contents of a bottle of hair bleach exploding in a suburban kitchen. I now had plenty of it in my hair, but miraculously none in my eyes, which have made it very unpleasant and not the stuff of a light-hearted Radio 2 confession. As I tried frantically to rinse the bleach from my clothes, and hair over the kitchen sink, my sister returned with the towels and went, "Oh no," blinking slightly camp like that. Blinking the water from my eyes, I looked around the room. Purple, foamy bleach dripped from every new cupboard. Remember, this is a new kitchen. Every new cupboard, the newly artexed ceiling, the new light fitting, the new Venetian blinds. How had such a small amount of bleach gone such a very, very long way? Needless to say, once we'd scraped up sufficient bleach from the worktops and other flat surfaces to enable us to dye our hair, as I said, we were 17, our priorities were a little skewed, we set about cleaning up the kitchen. Wiping bleach off spiky Artex on the ceiling with a cloth is neither easy nor enjoyable. For the record, using a J-cloth on spiky Artex leaves blue fluff on the pointiest bits, which you then have to pick off, thereby doubling the required effort. The Venetian blind was especially taxing, but we persevered heroically. We hit a problem, though, when wiping the newly papered walls. Mum had chosen a jazzy geometric patterned wallpaper in brown, beige and orange. Nice. Well, it was the 70s. And where the bleach had splashed, only white blotches remained. She would definitely notice this. We couldn't redecorate the room ourselves, so instead we grabbed our felt-tip pens from our pencil cases and between us coloured in all the areas of the missing pattern. It took us blooming ages, but it was surprisingly effective, and we congratulated ourselves. Our parents never noticed the crime, never knew what we did, never looked closely enough, although they were less than pleased with our hair colouring efforts. And I quote, "How do you think you're ever going to get a job looking like that? Silly schoolgirls, you're not pop stars, you know." Anyway, we took our scolding meekly, thinking, if only you knew the truth of what happened to your kitchen. There are many transgressions to forgive here. The frittering of our parents' hard-earned cash on cheap German wine, my shameless hurry to use the bleach before my sister, but mainly the deceit and conniving required to ensure that our parents never discovered our crime. With the aid of our felt tips, I beg the team's forgiveness, and if it will make the collective more sympathetic to my appeal, may I also say that whilst my sister's white blonde quiff was an absolute triumph, I was hugely disappointed in my own badger stripe, which turned out yellowish and looked, to be honest, quite common. Nice touch at the end, Nicci.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm sure there are going to be quite a few hair dye disaster stories. But, you know, when the bleach goes across a newly decorated kitchen, you are in a lot of trouble. Anyway, Joe's going first.
Okay, so as a parent, if this kind of thing ever happened to me, I would actually, I think, want my kids to colour in the bits, and I would never want to know about it, because otherwise I would absolutely explode. I forgive completely, because this is in the name of fashion and beauty, and if you are celebrating having done loads of exams and you've got the summer coming up, then this is the kind of thing you do. You do practice makeup on your best friend, and you do dye your hair, and if you're given money, of course you're going to use that money to make yourself look amazing and do the stuff that you've been dreaming about for ages.
£100.
Yeah,
wow.
Spend it on hair dye, kind of thing I would have done. So yeah, you're totally and utterly forgiven, and David Bowie would definitely have approved.
If that had been your kitchen...
Yep. No,
Would
like
you-
I said, I would have exploded. I would have killed the kids, but there you go.
Right, so so as long as you... Okay, so it's fine as long as it's not your kitchen.
Yeah,
Is that what
exactly,
you mean? Young Bobby.
Yeah, it's their resourcefulness that I admire. I'm a little bit with Joe on this one, although you should always take care with hair products. They didn't do a patch test, did they? I mean, how many of us...
They kind of did.
Yeah, and just, well, yeah, but not as not with the 24-hour required period
No.
to see if it's going to affect you. Be careful with chemicals. I mean, it's re-imaging, isn't it? You're reinventing yourself. School is over, and here you go.
But
So
that's
I'm
the point
all
on the
for
label
it.
when it says, you know, once you've taken the top off, don't put it back on again, because clearly there were gaseous products building up.
You see, that's what happens. Be careful. I think your mum and dad are brilliant to leave you and give you that much money. I think in this case, I'm going to forgive you.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that was Nicci's home dye disaster. I got dye on your arms tonight.
Still to come on the podcast, the confession that had Bobby questioning everything.
What can you say? What would you say? Would you say anything? What can you say? What would you say? Would you say anything? That's quite annoying, isn't it, really?
Do you think?
What can you say? What would you say? Would you say anything?
I love the relentless questioning tone.
What can you say? What would you say? Would you say anything?
I know what I'd say. I'd say, before you hear any more of this week's confessions, it's time to head over to the parish notice board to find out what you in the parish have been saying. Joe, what have you got there?
I have this from Lisa in Yorkshire, who says, "Hello, Simon, Joe, and the often shocked collective. I've been a keen listener to the confessions for years, and more recently the podcast, as I don't get to listen as consistently since having my daughter Connie 2 years ago."
No excuse.
Anyhow, I listen to the podcast every week, but due to having an Android phone, I'd not been able to subscribe. Thankfully, Google have finally launched a podcast app, so I now have subscribed. I found it's a fantastic way to get my daughter to go to sleep. On our commute back from my parents when I finish work.
Thanks a lot.
I can laugh loudly while she snoozes and arrive refreshed from a good giggle after a long day or week. Look forward to hearing future podcasts from my new app. Bit of a backward compliment there.
Well, so what is it that encourages her daughter to get to sleep, do you think? Just the relentless monotony of our voices?
Bobby's saying, what can I say? What do you say? What do you think?
What can you say? What would you say? Did you say anything? I think there's something in the edit there. I think the little one goes to sleep because of the car ride. I think that sends her to sleep. And her mum listens to us and doesn't fall asleep, obviously.
And the soothing voices, obviously.
Yeah, they're very soothing voices.
What can you say? What would you say? Did you say anything?
Strident
okay, enough
tones.
now.
All right. Okay, what do you got, Bobby?
Okay, first of all, I have this from Simone. Dearest Simon and the All-Knowing Collective, I have been trying for many a while to find the confession of the man who lived in Hertfordshire with his wife but wanted to move down to Dorset or Devon. From memory, the man feigned a new job to achieve his aim and left his wife and children in the dark until quite some time had passed. I will always remember being on the M6 listening to this and calling other Confessions fans in my phone book, all of whom had, like me, yelled "No!" when hearing it. I'd love to hear it again and indeed send it around with my Christmas cards this year. Preparation is key.
Christmas
I know.
cards?
What? Hoping you can help and that you too will enjoy reliving this one. Fantastic stuff. It wasn't it?
It was very good. And Simone, we have already played this particular confession as a classic confession from the crypt. It was on the 8th of September 2017, and you can still listen to it if you subscribe, or you can find it on the website. It is definitely there.
It is quite shocking and unbelievable.
Yes, it's basically he moves house, Joe.
Yeah.
And the whole family move house because he says he's got a job, but he hasn't. And he just wanted to move back to the area that he lived in when he was a kid.
So he just strung them along.
Strung
so they
them
moved
along.
house and then he had nowhere to go.
And his wife away from her friends and job, his children away from their friends and school. Yeah, it was
So
quite
this
a
is
biggie.
not funny.
This is not funny.
It was actually. It was very funny. Anyway, so if you want to hear that, it's the 8th of September 2017, and if you subscribe, you can find that.
That's bad.
Anyway, so we have this from Sarah. Simon, Bobby and Joe, despite getting my friend Anita to subscribe to the Confessions podcast by legal means, like actually introducing her to them, I've recently gone into the fraudulent business of sneaking a subscription. One day my boyfriend left his phone in my care for about 20 minutes, and seizing the opportunity to help the podcast, I subscribed him without his knowledge. I hope you will forgive me for this. I don't think he actually checks his podcast app because there are a number unlistened to. Anyway, because I already received a car sticker, thank you again for those, would you be able to play a previous confession for me? It was from about 2 years ago, I think, and it was about a family whose hamster had died. The hamster was called Tyrion, after the Game of Thrones character. I was at a hamster called Tommen, the name of the nephew of Tyrion, which is very complicated already, who's only recently died, so it reminds me of him. But I didn't put him in a biscuit tube. Now, I don't actually remember this, and I'm just surprised that we got a hamster confession actually on. Because 2 years ago wasn't different times. 2 years ago was exactly the same times. So, I know that there are different rules, like the goat confession wouldn't get on now, the hamster confession wouldn't get on now. So I can only think that it was fun. Do you remember that, Bobby, at all?
I vaguely remember something about a biscuit tin in a kitchen. Had we lost a hamster and it had to go there because they didn't have time to bury it, or something like that. But I might just be imagining.
Oh, it could have been that, because that would have got through. So it had already died. They put it in a biscuit tin or tube.
Yep.
As a way of burying it, then not actually got around to burying it, and then found that's fine, because that's not cruel. That's actually loving and caring.
Would you like a biscuit or would you like a dead hamster? Is that the way it works?
That's kind of
it. Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah. Oh.
Very nice.
Yeah, lovely. Remember, if you do want to get in touch with the podcast, you might have a confession of your own, or you might want to request a classic one that made you laugh out loud, or you might possibly just have managed to sneakily subscribe your mates to the podcast and you'd like to boast about it. Tell us all. Email confessions@bbc.co.uk.
So now, as inevitable as death, taxes, and a triumphant English penalty session, I hope that dates well, it's time for the sleazy part of the notice board, the non-compliant confessions that we would never, ever read out on the radio because there are different rules. And we're delighted to have a few non-compliant confessions this week that don't involve sick or any other bodily excretions, because so many of them have been obsessed with that. That being said, that doesn't mean you're going to get off lightly, William, just because you were a student. and students are notorious for pranks. Placing one of those exploding cap devices on a road where you knew a passing car would run over it was not funny or clever. In fact, it was very, very dangerous. I'm just pausing there so that Bobby can do another sound of non-approval.
It's not on.
There you go. The owner of that red sports car that you laughed at as he pulled over and then studied every part of his pride and joy, the car obviously, probably ended up taking it in for repairs that weren't needed. Lots of money was spent unnecessarily. Absolutely unforgiven. Plus, Bobby looks very stern.
Yep, very cross with you.
Clive's email starts, although there is a question over the legality of this story, I'm pretty sure no UK laws have ever been broken, which is a promising start. Clive then tells a story that involves too much beer, a mini fire in his kitchen, possibly illegal driving, and breaking both his heels after trying to climb scaffolding in order to dive into a pool.
What?
Well, Clive, we've decided that laws might not have been broken, but it's definitely got not getting near the radio.
Any one of those things, never mind all of them.
Breaking your heels.
Breaking your heels.
And Romy's story about the female hotel guest, the object a cleaner found on her bedside cabinet, and how subsequently every single member of staff at the hotel made subtle jokes about said object to her for the rest of her stay, is juvenile, though Bobby's laughing. A little bit funny, and probably not for the family radio. This is a very nostalgic phrase, the family radio, as though families have a family radio anymore.
That they cluster around.
Gather around everybody. Just to be clear, none of these are okay. That said, if you've got anything like it, please send it to us.
If you're not too shocked by those, then it's time to get back to this week's Confessions with George's sinful story. Here stuns the bride.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the excellent protectors of the moral compass. I quite like that. A day spent recently in the beautiful city of Bath brought back memories of a crime committed there 20 years ago, for which I seek forgiveness. I say Georgie is a girl, by the way.
Okay.
I was there with my husband Owen for his dad and partner's wedding. Both in our 20s, this would normally be a case of get up, get dressed, go to the wedding. But the recent arrival of our son Jonah meant that now things weren't quite so simple. That morning, having been up for most of the night with our newborn, we overslept. Dressing and eating hurriedly in turn, we rushed out of the door, dashing back to change, redress and top up Jonah one more time. We arrived at the registry office, along with Owen's stepsister and husband and their new baby Katie, to enjoy a lovely service, and afterwards the walk to the reception in a very smart hotel nearby. We were greeted by a friendly young concierge who ushered us all through the beautiful surroundings to the function room. Jonah and Katie, obviously sensing the importance of the occasion, were by now fast asleep, as babies are wont to do occasionally. So congratulating ourselves on our prowess as parents, we relaxed, chatted and enjoyed some food uninterrupted for once. Soon, however, the babies stirred. Their cries increasing, Owen's stepsister and I disappeared off to the honeymoon suite, which the bride and groom had helpfully made available for us to feed and change in peace and quiet. The honeymoon suite was beautiful. Sinking into sofas, we chatted as the little ones fed, and it was at this point that a plan formed in my mind. Remembering that my camera was in my changing bag, different times, obviously no smartphones, I suggested that it might be fun to take some photos of the babies sitting on the four-poster bed and give the finished film as a present to the bride and groom. Giggling, we were soon propping our babies up in various poses around the room and snapping away, excited at the prospect of the film being picked up by the newlyweds after processing. And so you might think you know which way this is going to go, but you'd be wrong. Jonah was a big baby, and all this activity had made him hungry, so as the others left, I stayed behind to feed him once more. We must have taken our time, and suddenly the telephone in the room rang. It was my husband checking that I was okay and telling me that the speeches were starting. Enjoying the piece, I'd forgotten all about it, to be honest. Grabbing my belongings, just forgot I was just in a random room, just having a nice time. Grabbing my belongings, I carefully balanced the now snoring Jonah over my shoulder and headed back. In the corridor outside, a waiter, delivering some food to a nearby room, smiled at me, but then blushed suddenly and turned away. Clearly avoiding my eyes, I rushed past. In the foyer, I nodded to the concierge at his desk. He too smiled cheerfully, although the smile seemed fixed to his face as he appeared rooted to the spot. Obviously, he was stunned by the sight of a beautiful child asleep in my arms. I arrived as my father-in-law got to his feet to deliver his speech, and everyone was listening intently. Dropping my bag, I gave a thumbs up to Owen and then pointed triumphantly at our sleeping son, conveying the message, result, look what I've done. To my bewilderment, his own smile disappeared and colour rose in his cheeks too. He stood very slowly and made his way towards me, squeezing between chairs as fast as he could, apologising to relatives, his eyes on me the whole time. He was making a kind of urgent swishing movement with his hands and staring at a point somewhere on my blouse. Well, I was completely confused. What was his problem? Our son was clean, dry, full and asleep. What is he going to be complaining about? Reaching me, Owen hissed one word, and the word was buttons, and pointed at me again. And looking down, I realised with total horror that in my rush to get back to the party, I had completely forgotten to fasten up, having fed Jonah, and, in capital letters, everything was on show. So that's everything was on show. As I bundled our baby back to my husband and fumbled with clips and buttons, the reactions of the people I'd seen on the way made perfect sense. They'd expected a normal day at work, but had been flashed by a young mother, and I felt dreadful for them. Later the reception was over. I was relieved to see that the concierge had finished his shift and was no longer at the reception desk. I seek forgiveness clearly from the concierge, the waiter, my husband Owen, for causing so much embarrassment. I offer too my apologies to Jonah, now at university, for being such a clumsy and inexpert parent. I suspect there'll be a few other stories along these lines shortly. Finally, I seek forgiveness from my in-laws, for although they enjoyed the results of our photographic session, the unexpected wedding gift of a small, round, slightly smelly pink bag tied at the top that had been left on their honeymoon bed probably wasn't quite so welcome. But that wasn't the star of the show. It was me that was the star of the show, and that's Georgie sending in tonight's tale. She just forgot there's a lot going on. She's very tired, a lot to take on board. She just forgot. That's all. Young Joe.
Easily done. We've all done it. Well, not all of us have done it, but many people will have done exactly this. There's no way that Georgie needs any kind of judgment. She's completely and utterly forgiven because, like you say, she's got so much going on. She was having a nice time, even forgot that she was at a wedding because she was just kind of free.
That's the key phrase. I think she forgot she was at a wedding.
She's just enjoying the beast, having a really, really great time. And I just love the bit Jonah was slung over her shoulder because that's what you kind of do with a baby. Obviously, you're gripping them firmly at the same time. But yeah, she's totally and utterly forgiven just for being a very busy mum, having a lovely time, bit of a break.
Young Bobby.
I think it's known as the Judy Finnegan moment. Do you remember when Judy went up on stage, collected an award, and unfortunately she wasn't feeding a baby, but similar kind of outcome.
Wardrobe malfunction.
Definitely. The thing is, I love the way, actually, that everyone just kind of blushed and didn't say anything. But then what can you say? I mean, maybe it's meant to be like that. If you were the concierge and you were quite young, what would you say, Simon, if you met a lady?
I think you'd say...
On display?
I think you'd say...
Would you say anything?
I would write down a note. I would say, you might wish to have a look at your buttons.
The thing is, you wouldn't want to offend yourself. That's what I love. I love the father-in-law. What the words he used were buttons.
You might
of
just
all
go,
the things he could have used,
buttons.
buttons. Yeah, well, it wasn't buttons, was it? Was the problem? Of course, you're forgiven.
Bobby
Poor
got to this much quicker than I did. I was just listening, thinking, what on earth is going on? So she just mimed to me the exact thing that had happened. So they could have done that. They could have done that action that you did. Yeah.
I'm not doing it again.
Obviously, no.
It's on display.
I can do it to Joe, but not you. It'd be wrong.
It would be wrong, and thank you very much for your sensitivity.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon, Joe, the Confessional Collective, my tale is set at the turn of the millennium when I was a stay-at-home mum to a toddler and a baby. My husband Jim was working. He was working very hard to provide everything that we needed, but also had a tight and miserly grip on the family finances. Let's be honest and say it like it is. Now, Jim is passionate about all things automotive. He loves cars. He loves spending hours polishing and tinkering with his bikes. And at the time, he had an Italian sports bike. And then there was Polly. I'd bought Polly as my first car, straight out of university, and she'd been fairly old even then. Jim had set himself a mission to keep Polly running, trawling parts bins and scrap yards and patching and repairing her. Bobby would approve.
I would.
This did mean that she was out of action with increasing frequency, sometimes for days at a time, which was frustrating with 2 small children to ferry about. When I asked about trading in for something a bit newer and more reliable, I was met with a sad face and, "It's just not in the budget right now, love. It's just not in the budget." One day I had agreed to drive the 20 or so miles to take the children to visit their grandma. It's a fairly isolated route. It was freezing and it was raining. Polly began stuttering and losing power and eventually completely ground to a halt. No phone signal. The rain was now lashing down. There was no choice. Pushing the baby in the buggy with one hand and carrying a howling toddler in the other, I set off towards some cottages about half a mile away. Fortunately, before reaching the cottages, my phone picked up a signal and I managed to call Jim at work. Freezing, soaked and in tears, I explained the situation. Ordinarily, he would have left work to come and rescue me. But on this particular day, he was presenting to some overseas clients and there was no way he could get away. "Don't worry," he said, "I'll call Paul." Well, Paul was one of his oldest childhood friends and shared his passion for cars and bikes. He ran his own garage with second-hand sales, repairs, servicing and recovery and had a fantastic reputation for being an all-round great guy. I'd also become close friends with his wife Karen, so we would often have lunch and gossip while the boys went for a run on their bikes. Paul duly turned up with a recovery truck, towed poor Polly to his garage, where he and his chief mechanic, with regret, declared her deceased. Paul conveyed the sad news to Jim. Jim reluctantly agreed a budget for another car. Paul helped me pick out a decent low-mileage estate. Jim was subsequently thrilled with his purchase and would tell anyone who would listen how much time and money he was saving, no longer doing all those running repairs on Polly. Happy days. And to this day, that is what Jim believes happened. The reality is just a little different. You see, Polly did not break down that day. The hysterical phone call was actually made, warm and dry, from Karen's kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand. The call from Paul to Jim bearing the bad tidings was done with Karen and I in the back office, desperately trying not to let our giggling be heard, and Paul fighting to keep his own face straight. We had, in fact, already picked out the new car. You see, about a month before, Paul and Jim had been out for a jaunt on the bikes, and over lunch Jim had mentioned a plan to have some quite significant performance upgrades to his bike when it was next serviced. A couple of £1,000 worth of work, in fact, for which he admitted he had some money set aside.
Oh.
Did he indeed? Later, Karen mentioned to Paul how I'd been complaining that Polly had been out of action for 3 days, but we couldn't afford an upgrade. Between them, they made the connection to Jim's sneaky spending plans and clued me in. The three of us made our plan. We deliberately selected a day when we knew Jim couldn't get out of work, and we put it into action. The awful weather was a lucky bonus. And that's how we finally got my skinflint husband to spend the money he'd hidden away for his bike to buy me a reliable car. Jim had to ride his bike for almost a year before getting the engine mods that he wanted, but I don't seek forgiveness from him. Firstly, I beg forgiveness from my eldest son, who's now 20, who's heard this tale so often he's now developed false memory syndrome regarding it. But most importantly, I seek absolution from Paul with his blessing, and likewise from Karen, as I now reveal to the world how he betrayed his best and oldest friend and temporarily became the most dishonest used car salesman in history. So thank you very much indeed, Paul. Well, Wendy wears the trousers. Ain't that the truth? That's very nicely thought up. That's like a whole sitcom in one confession. Joe goes first.
Well, what on earth is happening right now? Are they all gathered around the radio? Like, as Wendy got Jim to the radio and just said, let's just listen to
this
the
is
show
what
this
happened.
evening, to this confessions. And what on earth is going on at this very instant? Are they still married, actually? This is my thought. Are they actually still married?
I think it sounds as though they are, even
Really?
though he had a tight
How?
and miserly grip on the finances, to quote her.
Well, what good friends Paul and Karen are to Wendy, and and why did they want to do this to Jim? I'm a bit flabbergasted. I mean, she's completely and utterly forgiven. I'm just in awe, and I can't believe they're still married.
Well, it appears as though they are. We can await upgrades, obviously, and
Bobby,
updates.
what's your take?
Well, Wendy, you've committed the 3 Ds. You've been deceitful, devious and duplicitous. And normally I'd say you are not forgiven. However, here's the thing. Jim, right, I understand you love a vehicle. I've loved so many vehicles that I absolutely adore, but your priorities have changed. You've also made 2 children. So sometimes your priorities have to change and some of your vehicles have to go to look after those said children. And that's the way it is. And there are mums and dads across the country going, yeah, I had to give up my lovely car because I had to look after the children. Jim, you're a meanie. You deserve this on every single count. The fact that you'd sneakily, but also not just been tight, but actually looked after yourself to look after your bikes and your mods. So, Jim, I am surprised you're still divorced. Good job you're not married to me. You'd be a goner.
So basically, it's Jim who's not forgiven.
Jim is not forgiven.
This has all turned around completely, hasn't it?
You made Wendy this way.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Wendy's confession, car washed up, one which really resonated with an awful lot of our wives and girlfriends, judging by the amount of messages that we received.
That's it from this week's batch of confessions. If you want to send in your own dodgy, shadowy secret, confessions@bbc.co.uk is the email. But don't go anywhere just yet. It's time now for us to dig out a confession from the crypt.
And this week's has been requested from Liam in Southampton. Dear Confessions Jury, I'm writing to you with a request for a confession to be played on the podcast. It was in my early days of listening to the show and I'd only just purchased my first car, which I used to get to and from my first job after finishing uni. This puts the confession at some point between around October 2014 and February 2016. Fortunately, the traffic was extremely heavy on my route home, or else I may have had to pull over the car due to being unable to see. The details I do remember are about a family who own a boat. The story goes that they were in the process of cleaning the toilets of said boat and emptying out the tank. Oh, I'm feeling a bit queasy now. In which the waste is stored. I hope that's enough to go on and that it hasn't been on your podcast before. I've only just discovered the joys of the podcast and I've been going back through as many as I can within the last couple of months. However, I've been unable to find this particular one so far. So, just for you, Liam, here it is. We found it. Pump it up.
The Confessions Podcast.
I should say that there is... I mean, this is fine. Tonight's confession comes from Darren, by the way, but if you're feeling a little bit sensitive or serving food...
Okay,
then,
it's got food in it. Brilliant.
No, it hasn't. Well, no, it hasn't got food in it.
Oh,
but
it's
I'm just
something
saying,
else.
if you're serving food...
Has it got illness in it?
Well, I'm just not going to say any
think I
more
know what it's
details
got in
other
it.
than that, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, Darren sends in tonight's tale. Thank you very much indeed, Darren. Dear Simon and the Learned Crew, I grew up on the River Thames in Shiplake, where my father was a lock keeper. During the school summer holidays, I had a job at a local boat yard just downstream from the lock. My duties involved preparing the vintage launches for the day trippers and the cabin cruisers for holidaymakers. I was also the pump-out boy. When holiday boats called into the boatyard for water and fuel, they usually required a pump-out.
Yep.
Blackwater tanks, yeah?
Most boats had a fully plumbed-in toilet system, which, when it needed emptying, had a pipe which led from the toilet to the walkway or gunnels on the edge of the boat. My job was to pump out, while the holidaymakers usually either visited the yard shop or the pub next door. This task involved turning on the vacuum pump on the huge tank at the rear of the yard, then dragging the hose a couple of inches in diameter down the 50 yards or so through the yard and down the pontoon to the boat. So this is a big job he has to do. After climbing on board, I would unscrew the brass cap in the walkway and plug the large valve into the hole. Once I could hear the vacuum had reached full pressure, I would slowly operate the large lever and the coupling would make a complete...
What could possibly go wrong here? Nothing.
Complete airtight seal in the hole and the pump would start to do its work.
Obviously,
I've taken out an awful lot, by the way, already. Paragraphs of detail about the pump and what it's pumping. This hot summer day, a large cruiser pulled in on the pontoon at 1:45. My lunchtime, you should know, is 1 o'clock. 10 or so men and women jumped off and asked for a pump out. Well, my lunchtime was beckoning and I thought I had to hurry. They all headed off to the shop for ice creams and that kind of thing, while I started the pump out. I ran up the yard, turned the pump on and quickly dragged the hose back to the boat. I climbed on board, opened the first valve, and once the pressure was up, I yanked the lever open and there was a whoosh up the pipe. Flush and rinse, and the first loo was done in record time. I made it sound quite fine, this one. Yeah. I then slid down the gunnels and repeated the same rapid operation on the second loo. By this time, I had to hurry because the holidaymakers were beginning to wander back
down the pontoon. So I clambered over the boat to the far side, away from the bank, and started unscrewing the third cap. For the third time, I slammed the valve into the hole, and with the vacuum at full pressure, I yanked the valve open again. This time, though, it was not met with the whooshing noise that I'd come to expect, but with an ear-piercing scream from inside the boat.
Oh, no.
Unbeknownst to me, not all of the holidaymakers had left the boat for ice creams. A young lady had taken the opportunity to use the toilet before it got emptied, but I had caught her out. And the sudden sucking from beneath her had, shall we say, caused a reaction. I quickly shut the lever off and tried to remove the valve from the outlet, but it had made a perfect seal. And because the lady was, shall we say, a perfect match for a certain Queen song about making the rocking world go round, she unfortunately had also made a perfect airtight seal on the toilet, and she was stuck fast. With the scream still emanating from inside, I clambered over the top of the boat, and pushing the people on the pontoon aside, I ran up the yard to the pump. I hit the switch from negative to positive pressure. I then ran back to the boat, and after reaching the valve again, I slowly this time opened the valve to release the pressure and the lady from the toilet seat. Now there's about 4 paragraphs that I've taken
Which have gone.
at this point. With her finally released, I quickly ran back to the pump to reserve the pressure again and finish the job. Reverse the pressure again and finish the job. 10 minutes or so later, I was pulling the pipe back up the yard, and the blushing lady appeared from the cabin to sympathetic sniggers, cheers and laughter from her companions. I stayed back at the top of the yard and out of the way until they'd paid their bill, but one of the men came and found me. Well, I'm in for it now, I thought. But no, he produced a $5. He gave it me as a tip. And giggling, he said it was the best laugh he'd had all holiday. maybe it hadn't been a great holiday, who knows. So I seek forgiveness from the unknown lady who, as the boat was pulling away, was heard to be the butt of lots of jokes.
Well done.
And actually then there were lots of jokes there, which they're not making it on either, Darren,
No.
but thanks very much indeed. Well, I don't think we've had many kind of lock-based story. I'm not sure we want many more from the Pump Out boys. Thank you very much indeed. Let's see what Sister Bobby from the Priory makes of that.
Well, I'm familiar with such systems, because if you have an RV or if you have any kind of boat, it's, emptying your black water tanks takes a machine, a big sucking machine. And he's right about the description of if you are in your boat or trailer, it sounds like there's a monster on the other end of it, taking it all out. I've seen the dog absolutely terrified when this happened, and the whole thing shakes. But I think it's hilarious. It's one of those things you never want to happen to you, and it's lovely when it happens to somebody else, as long as it's not too dangerous.
It clearly was the perfect seal, and she couldn't move.
Well, I can imagine that happening, actually, because I was sitting there thinking, there's no cut-off with a normal toilet setup. Darren, you didn't mean to do it. It was a complete accident. I mean, perhaps next time you should give a warning, like all clear, down below in the ad.
Could have been.
That could be useful. I'm just saying, but actually, look, no harm was really done, was it? And
Everyone seemed to have a laugh about it.
Quick response. You're forgiven, Darren.
Yeah.
What do you think, Matt?
All clear. I love this story. This has brightened my day. Here's the point, though. I am going to think that these couples, I think someone had a row on the boat, because why else would they have left her on the boat? She's gone to the loo, and they decided at that very point they're going to pay this bloke to do the pump out. They knew she was still on the boat. They knew she was probably going to be going to the loo. So I'm going to say they knew this was going to happen, and the reason for that is they'd had a bit of a row. But I think this was very, very, very funny, and I'm sure everyone, even Deirdre, saw the funny side of this, I'm going to say. So I am definitely going to forgive.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt this week, Pump It Up, which is a very good title, featuring Liam, a boat toilet, and a rather shocked user of said toilet. I do remember that very well, very vividly.
It will make you think twice when you sit on the toilet. Any toilet.
I'm already thinking twice because I just worry about snails from recent podcasts that we've done and confessions that we've done.
Big suction. So there you go.
A lot, but it'll only make you think like that if you're on a boat, though. I mean, most ordinary toilets, this is not something that will afflict you.
I know, but it's still in your head, isn't it?
Sucking, you say?
Suction.
Suction. Yes.
Suction, you
There's
say.
an awful lot of suction going on. Yes.
If you have a request for a vintage confession, then do send us as many details about it as you can, including when it first went out to confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our best to dig them out from the crypt.
If you made it to the end of the last podcast, we asked you to tweet us the code phrase, I wanted to marry Captain Scarlet. Big thanks, Ed, Neris, John, and everyone else who tweeted that. This week's code phrase is...
Oh, I quite like I macerated a reconditioned toilet, you know.
Let's do that. I macerated a reconditioned toilet, you know. I think that's another
No.
Bobby Pryorism.
It should be I reconditioned a macerator toilet.
There you go. That's what it is. Let's change that. I reconditioned a macerated toilet.
Macerator toilet.
Oh, whatever.
That's almost it for this week. If you've got something that you want to get off your chest, you know how we love hearing from you. Send in your own confession to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Confessions podcast, and you can hear the programme starring Joe and me. Is that right? Does it star us? I
It's
suppose
an
it
all-star
does.
cast. It's
an
you and
all-star
me.
cast.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's 5 o'clock every weekday from Radio 2.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.